Okay, good day. So, today we will be talking about lesson number 2 about conducting hypothesis testing. And for this lesson, we will be exploring more elements of hypothesis testing. And we have here and here are the objectives of today's lesson. At the end of this lesson, we're expected to understand the concept of type 1 and type 2 errors, connect error to the process of hypothesis testing, locate critical values under the normal curve, determine critical values for hypothesis testing, and lastly, make decision about the null hypothesis. Okay? So in hypothesis testing, we make decisions about the null hypothesis. Okay? So ang basis ng ating decision ay doon sa ating null hypothesis. Of course, there are risks when we make decisions. When we conduct hypothesis testing, there are four possible outcomes. I have here the table or decision grid that shows these four outcomes. Ulitin ko, no? Yung ating decision will focus on the null hypothesis. From the table, mapapansin ninyo, kapag yung ating null hypothesis is true, ito nasa left side, yung reality, and then we accept the null hypothesis because this is true, ibig sabihin, we do not reject the null hypothesis, we're doing the right decision. Okay? That is a correct decision because null hypothesis is true, it should be accepted. Now, the reality is if the null is false and then you reject the null hypothesis, you're doing again the right decision. Okay? Kasi false ang ating null hypothesis and na-reject mo yon, that is a correct decision. Now, what if the null hypothesis is true and then your decision is to reject the null hypothesis, nagkakameron ka ng type 1 error. Kasi it should be accepted pero nireject mo yung null hypothesis. Kasi through yung null, nireject mo, you're committing a type 1 error. And then, if the null hypothesis is false, and then hindi mo ni-reject yung null hypothesis, you're committing a type 2 error. Okay? So, na ito yung ating four possible outcomes in decision making. So, actually, I'm going to give you an example. Let's say we have here a trial, and in a trial, there are four possible outcomes. The defendant is either guilty or innocent, or the defendant will be convicted or acquitted. Okay, yun yung four possible outcomes natin. Now, our null hypothesis is the defendant is innocent. Lagi namang ganon, ano? Until proven guilty lang, saka siya makukonvict. Right after na maipakita yung mga ebidensya, saka lang magde-decide yung ating judge. But the null hypothesis is, of course, the defendant is innocent, and opposite of the null is the alternative hypothesis, the negation of null, meaning the defendant is not innocent. Okay? So, pag-aralan natin yung table. If the null hypothesis is true, ibig sabihin, si defendant is innocent, and then, hindi mo ni-reject si null, therefore, you made the right decision. Okay? Kasi, at sa ganon, kung tama ang decision natin, ma-acquit yung ating defendant. Now, if the null hypothesis is false, ibig sabihin, si defendant is not innocent, and then you reject the null hypothesis, ibig sabihin convicted yung ating defendant, tama pa rin yung iyong decision. Ibig sabihin lang doon, may sala yung ating defendant. Okay? And then, if the null hypothesis is true, ibig sabihin defendant is innocent, pero ni-reject mo yung null hypothesis, kinonvict mo yung ating defendant, that is an error. You commit a type 1 error. And if the null hypothesis is false, ibig sabihin hindi inosente yung ating defendant, may kasalanan siya, pero nireject mo yung null, pinalaya mo yung ating defendant, you're committing a type 2 error. Okay? So, ito yung ating halimbawa on the type 1 and type 2 errors natin in making decision about the null hypothesis.